Thank you so much, Senator Nelson and Senator Rubio, for conducting this really important oversight meeting, and Senator Boxer as well on the Restore Act, a very significant piece of legislation that was passed 2 years ago and needs to be more fully implemented. But let me begin by saying that the state that Senator Vitter and I represent has been struggling for decades for justice and fairness for our coast. It has been my #1 issue since being elected to the Senate to advocate on behalf of coastal restoration, because without it, our state has a very, very limited and dim economic future. The coast of Louisiana is the largest section of land in America that is being eroded. It is the greatest pressures of any coastal area in the country. We lose, I've lost thousands of miles, literally, of land in the last 50 years. It is the state's, and should be our state's, #1 priority. It's both an environmental priority, it's an economic priority, and it is absolutely essential that we are successful. So several years ago, I led the effort to secure the only known, or identifiable source of revenue that could come back to the state to help us restore our coast, which is part of the $9 billion a year that the state generates for the federal treasury from oil and gas resources off of our shore. As you know, we're one of 4 states that produce offshore oil and gas. We've generated over $216 billion for the federal treasury. If Louisiana and the producing Gulf Coast states could get a portion of that revenue, we could begin to address our own coastal restoration challenges, which are our challenges, but this is really America's energy coast. It's America's wetlands. It's not just Louisiana's. We contribute hugely to the economic strength of this entire nation, which is why we believe it should be a shared responsibility and partnership. So I led that effort successfully. We're now receiving some revenue to come in, but when this accident happened 4 years ago, and 11 men lost their lives, and a huge platform in the Gulf, the Macondo platform, blew up with BP and other operators, I knew that there would be a large penalty to be paid. And of course, it was Senator Boxer's legislation, the Clean Water Act, that assesses a strong penalty for violators that pollute our rivers, our streams, and our oceans. Well, this was one of the largest, most egregious pollution events in the history of our country, when over 5 million barrels of oil spilled into the Gulf. Now, we've drilled 40,000 wells in the Gulf, Mr. Chairman, over a long period of time, and happily and thankfully, most of those have gone without incident. We have very strong environmental rules and regulations, but there was a defective, many defective processes then went on. The blowout preventer failed, and 5 million gallons of oil spilled, of course, along your shore, which does not do production, but you have risk, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana. We believe the bulk of the damage, of course, environmentally was done onto the Louisiana coast, but there was damage done throughout the coast and significant economic damage to our state and to yours as well. So that's why I led the effort to, and with Senator Vitter's good support and help, we built a broad coalition, including yourself, of stakeholders, both, the stakeholders here in Washington, Congress, and at the state level, and community and civic leaders to pass the Restore Act. As you know, it became law 2 years ago. Democrats, Republican leaders here in Congress and across the country came together to support it. The Restore Act was meant to implement quickly for the Gulf Coast to jumpstart restoration efforts. While we depend on revenue sharing as a long-term permanent fix, this could have jumpstarted our efforts. And the penalty, once it's determined by the court, is going to be somewhere between $5 billion and $20 billion. I felt like it was the most fair thing to direct 80% of that penalty back to the Gulf where the accident happened, which is what the Restore Act did and passed. But it's been more than 2 years since we came together to pass that Act, and both the Department of Commerce, as chair of the council, and Department of Treasury have failed, in my view, to implement the law the way it was supposed to. These deadlines have come and gone. The Treasury deadline has been passed. The Commerce deadline has been passed. And as I said, since the first deadline passed, Louisiana has lost an additional 35 square miles of wetlands, roughly the size of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which you and Senator Rubio are very, very familiar. These deadlines were not arbitrary. They were meant to be adhered to. The Gulf Restoration Trust Fund contains more than $600 million. It's not the full amount, which the courts will ultimately decide, but an early deposit was made of $600 million. That money needs to be distributed. During the last announcement on August 28th, Secretary Pritzker set a goal to have the ecosystem project selected within 12 months. August 28, 2014 is fast approaching, yet the Department of Commerce is off track to achieve that goal. I urge Deputy Secretary Andrews to explain in great detail what has changed, why these deadlines are being missed. Between all the previous reports and plans and the public process associated with them, this should not have been difficult. And I want to present to this committee, for the record, this is Louisiana's plan. We've had a coastal restoration plan for over 30 years, not 30 months, 30 years. This plan is ready to go. It is vetted by environmentalists, by business leaders, by our recreational and commercial fishermen. This plan has been signed off on not by one governor, but by 6 Republicans, Democrats, members of Congress stand behind, unified this plan. Louisiana is ready to go. We don't want to delay or wait any longer. If other states don't have their plans together along the Gulf Coast, well, they may have to miss the deadline, but Louisiana does not. So I urge the Department of Commerce to read our plan and to start funding some of these important projects that were anticipated as we passed the Restore Act. I know I've gone over my time, but let me just have 1 minute to close. Moving forward, we must also be sure that the ecosystem projects ultimately selected are steps toward the comprehensive large-scale restoration without regard to geographic state boundaries. That was what was intended by Congress, particularly for Pot 2. It's particularly important that the Council adhere to the statutory ecosystem restoration priorities and not add criteria to this. These responsibilities fall on the Department of Commerce. They will be testifying next, and your committee will oversee their work. In closing, the Department of Commerce and the Department of Treasury must make Restore a priority. They must stop failing to meet their deadlines. I am prepared to work with them in any way that I can. Implementation delays should not have happened, and they cannot continue. Once the administration gives the green light to restoring our working coast, the promise of the Restore Act will be realized, the promise of billions of dollars to Louisiana and our sister states who share much of the risk. We acknowledge that. We want them to be made as whole as possible. But Louisiana's plan is ready to go. There's no doubt that the Gulf Coast will have a brighter future because of the Restore Act, and with revenue sharing coming online starting this year and accelerating and increasing over time, we finally now have the money to fund a plan. We have the will, we have the plan. We need the partnership from the federal government to fund our projects, to save our coast, to secure our coast for its future and the economic future of the United States. Thank you.